Go ahead, Christoph.
Are we live?
Yes,
Okay.
we are live.
Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to today's webinar on pandemic preparedness beyond COVID-19, investing in vaccines production and supply for low and middle income countries that UNCTAD and WHO are co-organizing as a digital satellite event of the UNCTAD World Investment Forum. My name is Christoph Spennemann from UNCTAD's Intellectual Property Unit.
And I'm Jisoo from WHO's Local Production and Assistance Unit. We are the moderators for this webinar. In the next 2 hours, we are going to discuss with key stakeholders on how to promote long-term investment in vaccine manufacturing capacity in low-middle-income countries beyond COVID-19. Welcome you all.
Prior to the formal opening of the event, I would like to encourage the audience to submit any comments or questions in the online Q&A function. This being said, I now have the pleasure of introducing James John, who is Senior Director, Division on Investment and Enterprise at UNCTAD. James, you have the floor.
Thank you, Christoph. Thank you, Ji-Trui. Assistant Director General, Dr. Simao, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome to all of you, and thank you for joining us today at the event on pandemic preparedness beyond COVID-19, investing in vaccines production and the supply for low and middle income countries. And this is part of UNCTAD's World Investment Forum. We are pleased to organize this roundtable jointly with WHO. Your commitment, dear Maria-Angela, is a proof of the excellent partnership between our two organizations on the interface between investment and health. When we organized a joint event with WHO last April, we discussed in a broad manner the challenges rising for developing countries-based pharmaceutical manufacturers due to COVID-19 related supply bottlenecks that relate to diagnose vaccines and PPEs. Since then, global attention has zoomed in on the area of vaccines. New products have been developed at impressive speed, but it's taking time to scale up manufacturing capacity worldwide. Developing countries are particularly affected by the supply constraints. Due to the inefficient domestic manufacturing capacity and purchasing power, they depend on donor-funded programs. As expected, this takes time to obtain necessary funding and to distribute vaccines on the ground. Concerns has been expressed about equitable access to COVID-19 vaccines in poor countries. Here, I would like to highlight 3 points among the many regarding the importance of building manufacturing capacity for vaccines in medium and low-income countries. First, expanding production capacity in developing countries can help overcome these supply bottlenecks. Considering that the mutations of the new coronas may require repeated vaccination programs in all countries for some years to come, increasing manufacturing capacity in developing countries could also be part of the long-term COVID-19 response. As long as the pandemic is not under control everywhere, public health can be at risk anywhere. Second, boosting vaccine production capacity in poor countries generates benefits beyond COVID-19. Countries that graduate out of the Gavi support for routine vaccination programs against the cholera, measles, polio, typhoid, etc., may fully self-finance by their efforts. And this can be done through importation. but that's not enough, and it's more challenging. It should be and it can also be done through local production, with the added benefit of creating research and development capacities and jobs for the local economy. Thirdly, increase the domestic vaccine production capacity can enhance pandemic preparedness in developing countries in the future. As you may be aware, there are vaccines used to prevent and control about 25 plus vaccine preventable infections, such as hepatitis, human papillomavirus infection, tuberculosis, typhoid fever, and others. Switching existing capacity to address the pandemic comes with an important opportunity costs, as it may mean that fewer regular vaccines are made for those also life and death diseases. Industry representatives expressed concern about such scenario last year already. It is therefore advisable to invest in additional manufacturing capacity in developing countries to ensure routine vaccination programs such as pneumococcal vaccines or rotavirus vaccines to avoid increased mortality among the children. The challenge is to maintain investment in increased vaccine production capacity during the periods outside the crisis, when low demand makes investment in supply capacity unattractive. And this is particularly in the case of developing countries. In addressing this challenge, neither governments nor the industry can act alone. It is essential to build a global partnership. We need investors that look beyond quick commercial response, but we also need investors in investment in return that they need a kind of a stable policy environment and innovative technology to increase the chances of successful vaccine manufacturing and the long-term return in investment. I'm glad that today's event, we have a group of key players that can complement each other in providing political leadership, vaccine manufacturing capacity, long-term investment capacity, and the innovative technology and the know-how to de-risk investment. From UNTAD's point of view, we would like to engage in further collaboration with all of you beyond today's roundtable. Under our new Invest in Health initiative, we are happy to contribute the platform of our World Investment Forum, our outreach to governments, and our expertise in designing investment and incentive policies for pharmaceutical production. The Invest in Health initiative is aimed at strengthening developing countries' health sectors through policy advice, capacity building, and the partnerships formulation. The initiative builds on our May 2020 proposal of 10 actions to boost the low and middle income countries' productive capacity for essential medicines. Partnership play a key role in our proposal, namely to promote the development of skills and technology, to mobilize impact investment, to design conducive policy frameworks, and to address unstable market demand. I hope that today's meeting lays the foundation for such a partnership in vaccines manufacturing in low and middle income countries. Dear Maria Angela, ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to today's exchange and to implement them in the future. Thank you very much. Back to you, Jitri and Christoph.
Thank you, James. I now have the great honor to invite Maria Angela Simo, Assistant Director General of the Access to Medicines and Health Products Division in WHO, to deliver opening remarks. Maria Angela, if you please.
Thank you very much, Jisri, and thank you also, James, for this introductory remarks. Very, it brings a lot of reflections. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone. And first, let me thank UNCTAD for the joint initiative and for the organization of this satellite event of the World Investment Forum. I think the WHO is very honored to be joining you as a joint partnership on this. And I don't have to say that this pandemic has changed everyone's life, right? It went much beyond the public health impact, and it's affecting us as individuals, as countries, as economies, and as professionals. WHO has, as of this week, more than 114 million cases confirmed and more than 2.5 million deaths. And although we see, and for those who have been following the press conference or in the press, you see that there is a decreasing number of cases and number of deaths in many countries. We also see a resurgence, a strong resurgence, by the way, of cases in specific countries and some regions of the world. So it's far from over. And beyond that, we also have the potential impact of the variants, where we see already that the data showing that increases transmissibility. We're still waiting to see more data on the severity of cases, but we definitely are also seeking more and more research on the potential impact on the variants, on the vaccines, right? So this is just to show that the global health security that this pandemic has put up front all of us is only as strong as its weakest link. And this is very much important on the discussion when you're talking about equity, because no one is safe until everyone is safe in this planet now, right? No country can say they won't have more cases because they started vaccinating or because they have done this or that, because we've seen that unless we keep the measures in place, and vaccination comes as an extra tool, right? The protection measures of distancing, masks and hygiene measures, we won't be able to sort this out. And let me say also that this pandemic has shown that the global community can come together, right? And I think the organization, this forum is a very good a good example, right? But also the ACT-A, the access to COVID, the accelerator of access to COVID tools. It's a groundbreaking collaboration of international organizations that has facilitated the research and development. And now we are struggling with the access to the technologies, right? Research and development, I must say, because we never actually, to the best of our expectations, let's say mid last year, we would not think that we would have so many vaccines ending phase 3 clinical trials with good safety and efficacy profile. And as you must be aware, we have one of the pillars of ACT-A is COVAX, which is a WHO, CEPI, and Gavi-led pillar. It's aiming to ensure through the COVAX facility the allocation of 2 billion doses globally by the end of 2021. At the same time that we're working like crazy to ensure that countries receive vaccines, we are all witnessing how difficult it is to ensure that equitable access to these vaccines become a reality around the world. We see a lot of rhetoric and everybody talks about equitable access, but we see that the bilateral deals, the vaccine nationalism has been playing a huge role in balancing equitable access, right? It's not only, and because we have many countries who have already started vaccination, and I will talk a little bit about the rollout of the COVAX facility in a few moments, but WHO is very much stressing that, ensuring that all countries start vaccinating is not only an issue of a solidarity approach. No, it's not because this country or that country thinks about the global need or no. It's also important because of self-interest. Because as I was saying before, there's no way, we don't see that one country reaching populations all its population, won't have enough coverage to ensure that no new outbreaks will come. Because the more we have outbreaks in different regions of the world, while we don't control them, the possibility of new variants transiting throughout the world and making all efforts useless are great. So there's a huge push from WHO and from partners. That's not just enough to vaccinate your own population. You need to vaccinate all vulnerable groups, and vulnerable groups are the healthcare workers to protect health systems and people who are at higher risk of dying across the world, not just in one country. And we are seeing right now some developed countries increasing or making plans to vaccinate 70, 80% of their population by June. And why we are pushing that there should be a more equitable access across the world, and that we should have all countries start vaccinating healthcare workers in the first 100 days of this year. So last week, we through the COVAX facility, we started shipping the AstraZeneca-derived vaccines to producers, as the Serum Institute of India and the SK Bio from Republic of Korea. And we have already this week, last week, we landed in the first 2 African countries. This week, yesterday, 5 more countries, and this week, 10 more countries. And the push from the COVAX facility, and again, COVAX facility is Gavi, WHO, and CEPI, right? Is that we will have the 142 countries who will be receiving AstraZeneca vaccines, should be receiving these vaccines by the end of March. So this is a huge amount of work. We are working together with the 2 procurers, the main procurers, UNICEF and PAHO as well. And this goes from country readiness, because they need to have indemnification liability, regulatory approval, and lots of things. They have to have syringes. There are lots of things ongoing until the doses not only arrive in countries, but they actually get to people, right? They are used to vaccinate people. So this marks the global rollout by the COVAX facility, but much more needs to be done, and there will be other vaccines coming. WHO is doing the emergency use assessment of several other vaccine candidates, finalizing already the 2 Chinese, Sinopharm and COVAX. We have Johnson & Johnson's vaccine being assessed by mid-March. We have Novavax already start being assessed, and we are still at early stages of assessing the Gamaleya, the Russian vaccine. So we have a situation in the world where we have a high demand and a very small supply, actually, right? And this supply has been, although the COVAX facility has secured just 2 billion doses without an option of 1 more billion doses by the end of this year, but there's still a huge amount of vaccines that were negotiated through bilateral agreements. And and besides only having a small numbers of manufacturers right now, we also have the issue that production is not stabilized. So even for these manufacturers who have entered the market heavily through COVAX facility or through the bilateral agreements, they are still having problems in ensuring that meeting their contractual agreement. That's why we need to take measures to increase availability of vaccines that include more safe, effective, quality-assured products coming into the market. And local production, of course, can play a critical role for expanding this global manufacturing capacity and to help us towards achieving equitable access. And then, of course, there is a need for us to focus on the immediate actions that can be taken right now. And WHO with partners include Gavi and the Gates Foundation. I know they are part of this forum today. That what are the measures that can be done this year to increase capacity this year? It's probably more related to the fill and finish capacity. What's the spare fill and finish? Because you can't just disrupt the routine vaccination production either, right? Otherwise children will die of measles or other diseases that they shouldn't be dying of. And so there is all this WHO with the partners is starting an in-depth assessment of the fill and finish capacity, which includes, for example, assessing the existing sterile capacity, sterile solutions manufacturing capacity, because there's a lot of that out there. And what is it that could be used to increase the capacity on fill and finish? But on the other hand, this is not the only thing, right? Because the mid and the long term, we have several platforms, right? The several technologies that are being used now on these vaccines, right? From inactivated virus to the messenger RNA technologies to viral vectors and everything else. So some are new and some are very old technologies. In this, they have different potentials for increased capacity and technology transfer. So technology, but we also know technology transfer, and everybody who's on this forum today knows that it's not done from one day to the other, right? It requires a lot of preparation, it requires technical capacity on both sides and so on. And then we have the case, and I'm gonna talk a little bit more about the messenger RNA, because this is typically a technology of public health interest, right? Because it could longer term, not only it has the capacity to yield larger volumes in smaller plants, but it also has, not being a biological product, you can also use the capacity of potentially of manufacturers that deal with small molecules, for example. So it brings a lot of potential also for other diseases, for cancer. There's a lot of research around this uses for example, TB vaccine and so on. The problem is that we have an extremely limited technical expertise globally, and it's very concentrated. So WHO understands that the preparedness for future pandemics will also include measures to facilitate and increase capacity for these newer technologies globally. And then we have WHO does coordinate with other partners the initiatives like the COVID-19 Technology Access Pool, which we called CTAP, which was launched by WHO in partnership with the government of Costa Rica and 40 other countries. And CTAP actually promotes open science to accelerate product development and aims to facilitate the access by pooling knowledge, intellectual property through voluntary license, using the medicines patent pool, data, and other know-how. But of course, now it's the time to connect all dots, because we have a lot of partners working on local manufacturing. We have a lot on the, to attend the public, unmet public health needs in non-COVID times, right? And we have the need to bring together our partners under this pandemic, using this pandemic as an opportunity also to bring this all together. Just to say that this year there is a landmark resolution on local production which was initiated by Ethiopia, and it's being negotiated by WHO, the governing bodies, by member states, and will be assessed and hopefully approved adopted by the World Health Assembly in May. And we think that this resolution, if adopted, will give WHO and member states a new drive and also additional tools to support local production to improve access and combat this pandemic and future pandemics. And as we move forward, like I said in the beginning, we very much welcome this forum, and we need to nurture these collaborations. And now we need to connect the dots among all the players who are interested in increasing manufacturing capacity, not only for COVID products, but for global public health goods, because the world needs them. If they are available, they should be affordable, and they should be available to all countries, not to certain geographies. So let me wish you all a great discussion today, and I think we have a great panel, and thank you very much, and have a nice day.
Thank you very much, Mariangela, and thank you very much, James, for highlighting WHO's and UNCTAD's commitment in supporting vaccines manufacturing. So for today's roundtable, we're excited to have with us a group of discussants who play a major role in vaccines production and related investment. Acknowledging the need to address vaccine manufacturing from a holistic perspective, our speakers may be characterized as representing 4 key groups of stakeholders, namely policymakers, vaccine manufacturers, development finance institutions, and the providers of technology and know-how. We would like to discuss with them various issues. For instance, what incentives they consider necessary for long-term vaccine manufacturing capacity, who they think should invest, how such investment can be made more attractive, and how partnerships can be created and leveraged. Please also refer to the online program where some of these questions are listed.
So we have asked the speakers to elaborate on these questions from their perspectives. The diversity of their backgrounds and experiences will provide us with views that will help reflect the holistic nature of promoting vaccine manufacturing in the context of a developing country. To save some time for discussion after the roundtable, we have agreed with the speakers to limit each interventions to 6 minutes. So let's first begin with the policymakers to hear about their perspectives in supporting vaccine manufacturing. It gave me great pleasure to introduce the first speaker, Nakorn Premsri, Director from the National Vaccine Institute in Thailand. Nakorn, if you please.
Good. Thank you, Chisui. If you hear me well.
Yes, very well.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes. Good afternoon, good morning, and good evening to everyone, distinguished participants, Excellency, including Mr. James Chan and Dr. Mariangela. Good to see you again, even via online. May I share my screen, please?
Yes, please.
Please do, please do.
Okay, do you see that?
Yes, we do.
Okay, so just only one slide, but this is the way that Thailand is doing on this. But before this, I would like to refer to the previous pandemic of H1N1 2009. And by that time, WHO has supported Thailand is one of the country in the developing country to establish manufacturing capacity of influenza vaccines. And by that time, we built on the capacity of the egg-based influenza vaccine manufacturing at the government pharmaceutical organization, or GPO. And even by that time, we have so limited resources on vaccine research and development. However, we have a very strong on the vaccine design and concept by the number of institutes and universities. So when the pandemic of COVID-19 came in last year, so we collect on our potential researcher who can have the capability to develop the vaccine, and then we can collect the researcher to work on mRNA vaccine and DNA vaccine at Chulalongkorn University, and inactivated vaccine by Mahidol University, and subunit protein by again Chulalongkorn University, and viral vector vaccine by the King Mongkut University. So you see that a number of universities that they have a strong scientific background and they can develop the vaccine in the laboratory scale. And then the government provide the funding to support that vaccine discovery in our country last year. And then we moved some of the candidates vaccine to be tested in animal. And we've got a very good candidate result by the safety and immunogenicity in rodents and in non-human primates for the mRNA vaccine, DNA vaccine, and subunit protein vaccine, a plant-based subunit protein. And we also improved the facility of GMP pilot facility at King Mongkut University to be connected with the working from animal testing. Right now, we are preparing for the human trial in this year. You see that with our existing capability, we can do only that because sometimes we need to wait for the resource, especially for the animal testing center. Before this time, we have so limited capacity of animal testing, but by the government support, we can increase the capability of animal testing center. We improve the non-human primate center for the BSL-3 facility, aiming for the challenge test in non-human primate, and we hope that we will get by this quarter 2 of this year that we will have BSL-3 facility for the non-human primate testing. And for the hamster test, we also get the funding from the government to improve the facility of the hamster challenge test in Mahidol University. So you can see that by the pandemic, we get the opportunity to get more funding to improve our existing capacity and to be used for the COVID-19 R&D. And in Thailand, you may have heard that we have a good experience on the clinical trial, the large-scale clinical trial that we experienced on the HIV vaccine trial in 2003 and 2009. If you know about the RV144, the HIV vaccine trial that we were working with the US NIH and the MHRP of the US military, and that's the work that we have done. Do you still see my slide?
No, it's disappeared. You may want to share it again. Share your screen.
Okay. I don't know why it disappeared. Is on?
Yeah, it's back. Thank you.
Okay. So for that we have a good experience on the clinical trial. So we are well prepared for the human trial in the country. So during August and September last year, we've got the contact with AstraZeneca and Oxford University to have a good collaboration on manufacturing. And then we've got the technology transfer on viral vector vaccine of Oxford and AstraZeneca to be produced in Thailand. And we have our good contract manufacturing organization named Siambo Sense, which can have a capability to produce vaccine in around 200 million doses per year. And right now, the technology transfer activity has been done on track and on time, and we have got a good result of the technology transfer on that viral vector vaccine from Oxford and AstraZeneca. Hopefully that we can produce our vaccine for our country demand, as well as we are pleased that we can contribute for the vaccine production of COVID-19 vaccine to supply at least in the ASEAN region and other regions if possible. So those are the factor that we've got, that we have a speed on the pandemic response. Since last year, I can say that since February last year, we collect our effort, what we call the team of Thailand, that we work together both in government and private sector. And we have a supporting facility and mechanism by the existing resources. And we have our existing human resource development. And we have a good collaboration with the potential partners. So from now, the government is planning to support in the longer term of the manufacturing facility that will be established in Thailand for the viral vector vaccine, as well as we will get the funding to support the mRNA vaccine production, and as well as the inactivated vaccine, especially the vaccine that we have a collaboration with PATH, and it's a vaccine that's supported by Gates Foundation using a Newcastle disease virus as a base, and to be produced in the egg-based facility that we've got the support from the WHO since 2009. I will stop over here to share with you, and I'm pleased to welcome any question.
Thanks a lot, Nakorn. Yeah, please stop sharing your slides so we can go to the next presentation. But thanks very much for highlighting the good research environment that the Thai government has created, and no wonder this has attracted technology cooperations between AstraZeneca and Siam Bioscience. A very interesting case. I am now very pleased to introduce our next speaker, who is Mr. John Kangasang, Director with Africa Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. John, you have the floor,
please. Thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation with you all. And I'll be speaking from the perspective of where I sit. I mean, there's usually a saying that your stand on any issue is where you sit. I mean, let me start off by saying that as a continent of 1.2 billion people, we literally import about 99% of our vaccines in ordinary times. And we produce no diagnostics. We have been living with HIV/AIDS for 40 years, but there's absolutely no manufacturer in Africa that produce a very simple rapid test. And we do conduct about 100 million HIV tests a year. So let me use that as a premise to share my reflections with you. The COVID-19 has reminded us, not taught us, that as a continent, we need to invest more in our own health security instruments. And there are three of those instruments that guarantee and safeguard the security of a people. First of all is the ability to have timely access to vaccines, either through access or development. Second is diagnostics, and third, therapeutics. And in all those three dimensions, the continent finds itself at a very precarious position. I use the word COVID reminding us in a very deliberate way, because this is not the first time that as a continent, we are witnessing almost an extremely challenging scenario. In 2009, you all recall during the H1N1 pandemic that most developing countries have access to vaccines when the pandemic was actually over. In 1996, when drugs against HIV were developed, it would take at least 10 years for these drugs to be accessible at a programmatic level on the continent. And in between that, almost 12 million Africans died. I use that, colleagues, to say that as a continent, we have to begin to look at three things to ensure that we have vaccine security. First of all, as the colleague in Thailand indicated, we really need to look at African strategies for strengthening Continental manufacturing of vaccines, not just against COVID, but against other disease threats that will be on the horizon. We all have said over and over that it is a matter of time before another pandemic will hit us. And if you look back into the history of since independence of the continent, it is clear that we have all indicators that after COVID-19, there will be other pandemics that the continent will struggle with. But we cannot continue to position ourselves in a very vulnerable and risky position the way we are. So first of all, we have to look at what can we do urgently to repurpose and support groups like the Pasteur Institute in Senegal that is headed by very capable hands like Amadou Sall and other facilities in South Africa, Egypt, and others, so that they can actually contribute to the manufacturing or the production of vaccines, either through license or other processes there that will meet our COVID need. As a continent, we aspire to vaccinate at least 60% of our population, at least 60% of our population. It could be more. But to do that, we will need to do what I just indicated. Second thing is, how do we begin to project in the medium term to long term and deliberately invest using domestic financing and financing from other partners to ensure that we beef up Africa's capacity to manufacture vaccines, either using regional approaches or other mechanisms. But it is a dialogue that we have to have. It has to be a courageous dialogue. It has to move past political will to political commitment, because we have to commit ourselves that we will develop capacity on the continent to manufacture vaccines. And thirdly is that, of course, the debate is around transfer of technology and others, but we have to understand that as a continent, we have to invest in R&D, research centers and hubs across the continent that in peacetime will begin to develop and vaccines that are necessary to guarantee our needs in peace times, and can be repurposed to develop vaccines that are required during pandemics and outbreaks, such as Ebola, this current pandemic. We have seen, just last year, we published a paper in Cell where we look back since independence, since 1960, and projected ourselves right up to today and asked the question, how many deadly outbreaks have occurred? And it's many. When we got independence, we didn't have the chikungunya virus, we didn't have Ebola virus, we didn't have HIV/AIDS, we didn't have COVID, and you can name them. I think that we characterized that nicely in that review in Cell. And all to conclude that we must prepare ourselves to be able to fight two pandemics simultaneously, defeat them relatively well, and struggle with a third pandemic. That will be the definition of an Africa that is ready to face the future. I thank you all for your attention, and I look forward to an interesting and a dynamic exchange.
Thank you, John, for sharing your view from the angle of the African continent. Really appreciate. Totally agree with you. It is time to invest more on the security instruments. With the question you mentioned, the short-term solution, long-term commitments will go on with further discussion. So having heard from the policymakers, now let's invite the manufacturers to share their points of view. I'm pleased to introduce Suresh Jadhav, the Executive Director of the Serum Institute of India. Suresh, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, ma'am. And thanks, Christophe, for giving me this opportunity to be part of this wonderful roundtable discussion. I think the topic which we are discussing today is not new. Can I continue? Yeah.
Please.
Yes.
Is not new, and this was discussed several times in the past. Whenever there was an outbreak of a disease or a perception of a pandemic coming, example, the H1N1, SARS, MERS, Ebola, H5N1, Nipah, we had talked about this particular action plan that every country should have an access and a capability to make the vaccine. But historically, I think we must see what exactly has happened. When there is no pandemic and when there is a requirement of normal vaccines, as our colleague from Africa has just said, that they have a population of 1.2 billion, but there are only two so-called functional manufacturers. One in Senegal, one in South Africa. One is making only yellow fever and other is making only the bulk filling at this moment. There was a time when there were additional manufacturers, but they stopped. So we need to go into the reasons why these manufacturers who were there, and there were several Pasteur institutes who were functioning at some point of the time, they are not functioning at this moment. In fact, I will reiterate that WHO tried to revive this thought in 2007 itself, when they wanted to sort of encourage the developing country manufacturers to start making pandemic influenza vaccine against H5N1. And I think when in 2009 H1N1 struck, they also came out with a so-called solution that they selected 5 manufacturers in the first round and another 6 manufacturers in the second round, gave them a small seeding amount, gave them the technology, gave them the seeds to make the pandemic vaccine and also vaccine against H1N1. And that's how I think Serum Institute and Indonesia are today the only 2 companies out of those 11 are still continuing to make H1N1 vaccine. All other companies, they stopped. So what this indicates to us that vaccine is a different ball game. It's not a normal pharmaceutical. You have to have the infrastructure which complies not with your country's regulation, but it also complies with the international regulation. Because if you want to supply to the neighboring countries or other countries, you must get WHO pre-qualification. If you decide to make vaccine in every country, it will be a total failure because it will be too expensive. The amount of vaccine that every country requires will depend upon what is their normal requirement year on year, which is usually the infant vaccines or the EPI vaccines. And that number is so small that making a plant in every country will not be a good idea. So you'll have to think about making a plants in the region, and they are funded properly. On the other hand, I think what we see is in Europe and United States or other developed countries, the pandemic preparedness is absolutely on dot. In the sense, most of the vaccine manufacturers who are making influenza vaccines are also making H5N1 vaccine every year, knowing that it is not being used, but the countries buy certain quantities of that vaccine by paying, keep a stockpile with them, and destroy that stockpile if it is not used and replenish it next year. So that gives an advantage to the manufacturer that there is an assured buyer who pays them so that the factory which is prepared for making this particular product is up and running, complying with the regulatory requirements. And I said vaccine is a different ballgame because you require to keep up with the CGMP. And CGMP, because the pharma business is a dynamic, it changes every time. And you have to be constantly fulfill the ambitions and aspirations of the regulators. The machinery is changing, the technology is changing, and you must comply with all that. I think the COVID has given us a very different lesson. COVID is the first disease, or COVID-19, the first disease what we have seen, for which today 365 companies, laboratories, universities are working to develop a vaccine. This is unprecedented. It has never happened in the past. Not more than 2 or 3 companies will start working on a new disease or new product. But here, first time, because of the availability of different technologies, different platforms, everybody wanted to see whether they can use these new platforms and make a vaccine. And although today, I think another, dichotomy that I see, which was said in the opening remarks, that today 192 countries have become members of the COVAX. And the COVAX was created to have equitable access and distribution of the COVID vaccine. Now, when you say 192, that means all the developing and poor countries, middle income countries, and even high income countries have also become member of the COVAX, expecting to get some amount of vaccine from them. On the other hand, most of the rich nations have direct contracts with the manufacturers to acquire more than their requirement of the immunizing total population. Because COVID has taught us one thing, that if you want to immunize even 75% of the total world's population, you will require minimum 10 to 12 billion doses. And there is no capability of making that kind of numbers with any manufacturing company. So there has to be multiple companies coming out with different technologies, different products, so that these aspirations can be fulfilled. But suppose what happened with the SARS and MERS, which were the, brothers of this COVID vaccine, because they belong to the same family. SARS came, vanished maybe in 8 months or 10 months. MERS came again, vanished in 1 year and 1.5 years' time. So suppose tomorrow the COVID vanishes, which is my wishful thinking, then what will happen to the facilities which have been created to make this huge number of production? So you will have to have an alternate plan, and there has to be total commitment from the governments and politicians that they will support the vaccine production. There should not be any vaccine nationalism or in distribution or my country first and I want to immunize only my population. If that thought process goes, then this whole structure, what has been envisaged by WHO and other people to make COVAX, will be of no use. That is my, of course, personal opinion. But making a additional facility anywhere, it requires tremendous amount of technical knowledge, trained manpower, and technologies to operate. And if you do not have dedicated manpower who are committed to that particular philosophy, and if the people change, one technical person goes to come back and restart that whole production process, takes a very, very long time. And this is something which needs to be taken into mind when we are going to decide about starting additional facilities and supporting them in different places. Additionally, or alternatively, you can support the existing facilities by promising that financially they will get the help if they keep that facility up and running, so that anytime any pandemic strikes, whether it is bacterial, fungal, viral, that facility could then be tweaked and made it ready for making the production. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Suresh, for highlighting the difficult market in vaccines and for also outlining the need for government support in this area. I'm now happy to introduce our next speaker, Amadou Al-Fassal, who is Administrateur Général de la Fondation Institut Pasteur de Dakar. Amadou, you were already mentioned by John before, so you have the floor now, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Christopher, and thanks for the invitations. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I just wanted actually to talk from the perspective of vaccine manufacturer in Africa. As previously mentioned, but very unusual one, we are manufacturing vaccine in the context of research centers involved very much in public health, and working and bringing vaccine as part of the ecosystem.
Amadou, sorry, we don't see you. Could you make yourself visible? That would be nice. Thanks. Sorry.
Yeah, I've been trying, but I think something is wrong with my camera. That's why.
Okay, no worries if it doesn't work.
Sorry. Yes, getting back to what I was saying, I think seeing vaccine as part of an ecosystem in a context of developing country is something, the sort of perspective I want to bring in. The reason why I want to bring this is in the light of the question that has been addressed to me as part of the preparation of this panel. I think that was a very important one. How a vaccine manufacturing happening in a country like Senegal for 80 years and being pre-qualified since 1966. What are really the challenges and how this can be happening in a context where an organization is non-for-profit? The reason why this is an interesting model is really, it's the situation that may be faced in many LMICs, where really all the different conditions may not be available to be a vaccine manufacturer in the classic model. And that's, I think, why these sort of lessons can be critically important. I think the major challenge actually a country can face when they're doing manufacturing in the context of being a developing countries with different challenge for global health is first to be able actually to invest on a regular basis to maintain and meet the international standard of vaccine manufacturing. This investment is made very complex in a context where actually the market is driving the cost to be the lowest possible for the vaccine that are in high demand in most of the country, in most of the LMICs. The number two challenge is really the regulatory and the constant change and stringency, which is growing over time about the vaccine industry, where each manufacturer has to regularly upgrade the standards, which imply more and more investment and more capacity to be built. So which imply that from a financial and investment point of view, this is something really a challenge that people have to face on a regular basis. The third thing is really when it comes to the market, as a small manufacturer, you don't have much control on the costs and how the market would react. And I want to take the example of yellow fever vaccine, which is a vaccine of high demand, mostly on shortage at the global level, even though things have changed recently, but for which the market is not very interested because the vaccine is not, very expensive and you don't make much money out of it. Still, it's a vaccine of high demand, very needed, but for a market that is not really so attractive from the financial point of view. And that's the sort of question that any manufacturer in most of the country like Africa would have to face, because obviously the very profitable vaccines are already being taken care of by major players. So
Amadou, we cannot hear you. Are you there, Amadou?
Critically important aspect is, as was mentioning our colleagues from India, we should not make a mistake of trying to build a vaccine manufacturing in every country. I don't think this is going to work. The vision would probably be to have some sort of regional hub or platform where it's going to be possible not only actually to manufacture at the high level of standard and invest enough capitals to be able to maintain it, but also would be area where you would bridge vaccine manufacturing with R&D capacity, because these are going together and need to go together, particularly in the context of Africa, where today, besides the COVID, we may face epidemics that may be relevant to our country with pathogens that are not that important for other areas. So technology with R&D capacity joined together to be able actually to manufacture, on one hand, the vaccine that are needed for routine immunization, for instance, but also vaccines that are needed for epidemic. You have in mind Ebola, cholera, and COVID, and also have in mind that such a capacity can be converted, is needed to new epidemics for disease X, for instance. And that's why this R&D platform is absolutely important. The reason why R&D platform is also important to join them together is that on a regular basis, we see that for the vaccine development, you need to understand better the disease And many of the diseases that may be extremely relevant, like Lassa, are actually not very well understood because the default of R&D and also the capacity to do enough clinical trial and things like that. Thanks to CEPI, this is changing quite a lot. Second different ideas, I think we should see vaccine manufacturing in terms of technology when it comes to LMICs and ad, to be able to have platforms that are flexible enough and interesting enough to increase very quickly the portfolio in terms of needs. Today, some of the platforms like vector technology or RNA technology can be extremely interesting in the sense that they allow through the process, not only to manufacture the vaccine, but also have the opportunity to produce other biologicals that may be extremely important when it comes to struggling with some epidemic. The reason why I insist on this technology platform is that today, while people are thinking about making vaccines, many people think about therapeutics in terms of monoclonal antibodies, and Ebola has been quite good in the sense that making monoclonal in the context of epidemic can help a lot. At the same time, having a vaccine handy is also something important. So having technology platform like what we can have now with some cell culture process is something that is very important. So the second important aspect in terms of vision is really to make sure we have flexible platform, and particularly the platform like RNA are extremely promising, not because they are like technological breakthrough, but because of the potential they provide into adapting to new disease, which is happening on a regular basis, but also adapting to the vaccine to context like what we see in COVID with new variants. And I think this is a second important point that need to be done. The third one, which is to me very, very important in terms of vision, we should see this not only regional in terms of geography, but in terms of partnership. We have to be extremely careful on making sure that at the regional level, there is a very strong partnership among the different key players and the key countries, because most of the market in Africa is driven by a few countries. And the second important aspect in terms of partnerships, the needs are really huge when it comes to human resource and when it comes to actually targeting exactly the very important disease that may be considered neglected because they are not driven by a larger market. And what I say in this regard is some more cooperation that is happening between the manufacturer or people within Africa, but also with other manufacturers like LMICs would be extremely important. Having more cooperation between structure like Serum Institute of India, the Institute Pasteur in Dakar, or other manufacturer would help really to leverage what existing so far because of the common context that you may have on the process they went through. Now, I just want to finish with one sort of optimistic view of things. Last year, I visited Biopharma in Indonesia and went through their process, how from a former Pasteur Institute like we are today, they become one of the world's largest manufacturer for disease like polio or things, or vaccine like that, and either for their own actually country, which is exactly, I think, what I think is feasible, but it needs commitments. It needs actually really opportunities to try to leapfrog what is existing so far now in terms of technology and support to reach a market which is mostly driven by demand rather than the profit necessarily. So that's why I think in terms of being business model, it's critically important to have that in mind. So with that, I'll stop here and thanks all the different speakers for now, and we'll be happy to answer any sort of question. Over to you, Christophe.
So thank you, Amadou, for your insightful intervention. The challenges you raised, again, confirmed promoting local production need a holistic approach, capacity building, constant capacity building, regulators strengthening, harmonization, and market intelligence, market demand, and government commitment. I just name a few. And also thank you for sharing your vision for future development. I took note, regional hub, R&D platform, technology platform, key partnership, very insightful. Thank you again. So now I'm pleased to welcome Patrick Tipple to the floor. Patrick Tipple is the Executive Director of the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative. Patrick, if you please, thank you.
Thanks so much, Yasui. Just checking that you can hear me clearly.
Yes, we can.
Yes, thank you.
Excellent. So thanks for this opportunity to participate in this panel discussion. I must say it's quite daunting coming behind four speakers earlier who seem to have covered all the key points. And so in the interest of time, I'll try not to repeat those things, but just to share with you some additional thoughts or put some additional color to some of the points raised. I think the appreciation that that pandemic preparedness is based on routine production capability must be a given at this stage. We've seen this repeatedly with respect to the COVID-19 situation, that where the capacities were already in place, not necessarily perfect, there was an opportunity to use those capacities as springboards to enhance vaccine production. And so when we talk about pandemic readiness, in terms of vaccine access, which relies on local vaccine production capacity, and as I'd like to say, the best insurance of access is to make it yourself. Recognizing the previous points made that we're not necessarily talking about vaccine capacity in each and every country, and that a regional concept makes complete sense. I think what is important to note is that vaccine production, as has been said, is extremely complex. And when we talk about vaccine production, especially to policymakers, funders, financiers, the general public even, that the conversation needs to be far more nuanced, so that just because you can make vaccine 1 doesn't necessarily mean you can make vaccine 2. And this is an important point as we consider this complex problem. And so what I'd like to also emphasize here is that the way I like to see it, that there are two aspects on the technical side of things. The one is technology capability and capacity. What technology platforms are in place in certain companies, and what products can they direct those technologies to in terms of production. And the second part of that is scale. They might be quite capable, these technology platforms might be quite capable of producing several different products, but the scale at which they produced are not, is nowhere near that which is required, for example, in a pandemic situation. So these are some of the complexities attached to building capacity, and it's certainly not a linear kind of discussion that one needs to have. And I think that somehow or another, and I recognize that we have to put things down on a page in a list form, that these are the 10 areas that one needs to cover, but it does lead us into the temptation of tackling each block on its own, saying, oh, we progressing nicely on the regulatory front, and we've got this technology transfer partnership, and we're building this capability. But where this thing falls flat, certainly with respect to the African context, is the ecosystem, the enabling ecosystem, where all of these elements need to interact. That's not been pulled together appropriately enough to stimulate this capacity building. So just to double back a little bit, so on the one hand, we've got the technical aspects, which we can all enumerate quite easily. But the other side of the coin is that if we spend the time, effort, and money investing in building the capacity, the big issue on the table, and in my reckoning, that's why the capacity has not been built yet, is how we get to sustain it. And this is the financing and funding part of it. And I don't want to repeat what other previous speakers have said, but they touched on the need to guarantee offtake, to create regional markets. Without that kind of commitment from government upfront in terms of the capacity building, but also downstream in terms of the absorption of product and creating a market which hopefully governments would now recognize is absolutely essential. And there's no debate about that, because when our backs are against the wall in a pandemic situation, then we are found wanting. So I think that we can talk about partnerships, we can talk about technologies. Just a comment about the mRNA technology as an example. I think with due reason and merit behind this, the mRNA technology platform is an exciting one. But for a small manufacturer in Africa, starting off, one needs to take a forward view of saying, if we build the mRNA technology capability, then we can leapfrog, as they say. But what is the guarantee that there are going to be products that we can make that the market would want and require in 4 or 5 years' time when that capacity is installed? So these are some of the aspects that have been covered in other fora as well, and documents about the considerations attached to the capacity building exercise, Continental exercise. Just the final thought that I'd want to put into the mix here is that we spoke of regional hubs, vaccine manufacturing hubs, and I think that there is a necessity for, certainly in Africa, for us to get together and also have a conversation about who's going to focus on what, and hopefully arrive at an integrated plan where we're not tramping on each other's toes, but we're working together in a cooperative way where the sum of the parts is great, contributes, is greater than the whole. And where one manufacturer could focus on a technology platform and another manufacturer could focus on a second technology platform as a primary key sort of investment focus. There's much more to say, but in the interest of time, Jesui and Christophe, I'll hand back to you.
Thank you very much, Patrick. I really appreciate your really interesting remarks on the holistic picture that we need to have when we talk about vaccines manufacturing. It's not enough to look at the technology, but you need the political support, you need the investors. And we have heard now from policymakers, we have heard from manufacturers, and let's now turn to the development finance institutions and investors to learn more about their ideas and approaches to developing country-based vaccines production. And I'm really happy to introduce now Mr. Abdou Mukhtar, who is Director at the Industrial and Trade Development Department of the African Development Bank. Abdou, you have the floor.
Thank you, Christophe. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank UNCTAD and WHO for organizing this really important forum. And I want to also recognize and appreciate the good work that institutions like the Africa CDC are doing, and people like Amadou Sall. We know how he's really working and trying to set up manufacturing capabilities in pharma and vaccines on the continent. And this is things that is very close to our heart. Let me begin by really addressing one of the questions that I saw in the chat box. An anonymous speaker said he's playing a devil's advocate and basically asking the question, why are we even doing this? Why are we even talking about this? Why do we need to have local manufacturing for vaccines on the continent? So for us as a DFI and in the African Development Bank, we have three main motivations. The first one is the public health rationale for this, and Dr. John, Africa CDC actually has talked about this. We need to develop local solutions to local epidemiological profile that we have on the continent. If we don't do it, nobody will do it for us. Right now it's estimated that at least about 10 million African children are actually under-immunized with DTP3, which is a proxy for vaccination, and this is something for concern. So it's important to look at it from a public health perspective. The second rationale is a strategic rationale, which is really to guarantee a minimum security of supply. And again, Dr. John has talked about this. But if you look at it, if you look at scan through, pharmaceutical companies, there are a number of vaccines that are in development: malaria, HIV, Ebola, Lassa fever, Zika. These are diseases that are predominantly affecting us here on the continent. So when this eventually we have good vaccines for this, it is important that at least we should be able to manufacture some of this on the continent just to maintain that minimum security of supply. The third rationale why we're doing this is the industrial rationale, which is really contribution to the industrial base. And on this, I want to say, let us look at the numbers. The total vaccine market globally is estimated to be about $20 billion US dollars. Africa accounts for only $1.3 billion of this, which is about 6.5%. And this is all concentrated in about just top 5 countries on the continent, which contribute about half of the total market in terms of volume. The market is expected to grow substantially in the next decade to at least 5 to 6 billion US dollars. And this is due to really just changing demographics, population growth, but it's also increased coverage for some of these basic immunizations. New products are coming to the market. And then there's also the question of, what happens when countries graduate from Gavi. There is a debate on where that will go, but I think that will create a bigger market opportunity. Right now, on the pharmaceutical sector, there are about 600 pharmaceutical value chain players on the continent. Out of this 600, only 34 are actually in vaccine development. And out of this, only about 7 are in some form of production or manufacturing in some way. That includes people like Amadou Sall in Ethiopia. So this is very important. And when you look at it, if anything, COVID has really just created that just the buzz and basically said to people, ask the right questions. What happens with the next pandemic? What are we going to do? We received in the African Development Bank calls from at least 15 African heads of state at the beginning of the COVID-19 crisis, and basically saying, what are you guys doing on pharmaceutical production? What are you doing on vaccine production? What are you doing on PPEs? We cannot continue to do like this. All the supply chains were disrupted around the globes, and everybody is doing nationalism around some of these products. Where do we stand? What do we do? So to address some of these things, one of the things that we did in the bank, we launched a major study, a pharmaceutical sector development strategy with a top-tier global a consultant firm. Talked to everybody from the manufacturers to research scientists to sister DFIs to governments, policymakers, and everything. And we came up with what we call a Vision 2030 for the pharmaceutical sector. We just finished this study. We're going to launch it, and I would like to invite, and I'll reach out to many of the people around the table here to have a good discussion, because what we developed is not only what the African Development Bank will do or can do. We basically say, what does the continent need to do to really develop, the manufacturing capacity for pharma, including vaccines, over the next 20 years or so. So, and then outline the role that each of these people and the partners will potentially play. Now, to conclude, we have several instruments in the bank to support. We obviously, with the private sector, we provide direct financing in terms of debt, in terms of trade finance facilities, in terms of guarantees. And these guarantees are really important to de-risk some of these investments. One thing that people know, I'm sure around the table, is the vaccine development process takes a long time. So to set up like a viable facility, it takes maybe at least even up to 10 years. So you need cheap financing, you need guarantees to de-risk and provide, financial solutions. And these are the kind of things that we can do directly with private sector players and manufacturers. With governments, we engage daily on policy dialogue to look at the policy, industrial policy for the governments, to make sure that they have the right policies in place, help them with that. We talk to them around infrastructure that are vital requirements for manufacturing of anything, but more so vaccines. So on the basic power, roads, cold chain, logistics, infrastructure, and so on. We work with governments to see how we can help and support also financially, but also in terms of policy advice and technical advice to be able to do this. Finally, with technology partners, we also support, research institutions because when you talk about technology transfer, you need to walk the people transferring the technology, the companies and organizations. They need to have counterpart, research institutions, research universities, and so on. So one of the things that we have outlined to do to support is also to create some of those research hubs, but more importantly, support them with the technical know-how and facility and financing to be able to do that. I will stop here. I know I've exceeded my time, but there's so much to talk about, and I really appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Abdul. So from your speech, we know what are the motivations from the continent to promote local production. Number one, improve access. Number two, health security. Number three, stimulate knowledge-based economy. We are looking forward to the launch of your Vision Study 2030. Wish you a big success. With that, now let's welcome Victoria Goodfellow, Executive Director of Alliance Hyde Global Partners. Victoria, the floor is yours, please.
Thanks so much, Yaswi, and thank you to all of the speakers that have gone before who very eloquently set out, I think, a lot of the really key perspectives that I think investors are also thinking about. And it's reassuring, I guess, that actually many of the themes that we've already heard are also top of the list when investors are thinking about this topic. I mean, I think in good news, this topic has been pushed really high up agendas globally. So obviously sort of been a big domestic push from the African continent, but it's very high on a number of donor agendas as well. So I do think there is a real moment to be seized here. We have been working with some nascent initiatives in Kenya and Nigeria and elsewhere on the continent. And so I thought it might be helpful just to share a few insights from some of the conversations we've been having with potential investors, just to give that lens to the audience today. I mean, I think there's definitely appetite from a range of investors for these projects, subject to business cases being much more fully developed. And I think that's sort of really kind of where these initiatives are at the moment. Is there's lots of potential initiatives in the pipeline, and a need to really kind of, I guess, roll sleeves up and do a bit more digging on building business cases, which has been a bit of a stumbling block, I think, in terms of getting finance for some of these feasibility type studies. But I think subject to that going ahead, and we've done some high level work, I think there are really good opportunities here. The DFIs are definitely interested. Local pharmaceutical companies in some contexts have expressed interest in committing some of their own capital to these projects. Some countries do have capability to for the governments to actually put some financing behind these. And then I think with this, there's also the potential then to crowd in some other impact investors given the right structures. What is critical, I think, from the conversations we've been having is, given many of these nascent projects are lacking sort of the depth of experience in vaccinology that is needed, there's a real desire to see strategic investors come into this space as well. So existing manufacturers, or at the very least, having substantial evidence of committed technical partnerships from these organizations, such that the execution risks of the project can be diminished somewhat over time, and that'll give more comfort to investors. And I do see this as being key to unlocking finance flowing into this space. So I think there's a real role here for coordination and pulling various actors around the table, right? I mean, any one of these projects is going to require multiple investors given the level of capital requirements. So I think initiatives like today are a really good starting point to get all the voices in the room so we can start to thrash out some of these issues. I do think, the other thing that I think is really critical that investors are really thinking about is the role of new technology, and that has been touched on a little bit before. And this feeds in a bit to kind of thinking around domestic versus export markets. And I think particularly technologies that can help lower costs at smaller scale can present a really key opportunity for some countries looking to pursue much more of a domestic rather than export supply strategy. And I think we may hear some more from others participating later in the conversation around that. And anything sort of similarly around any modular approaches that lower project construction risk, etc., I think will be quite welcome by investors. I think one of the other sort of final points really from the investor side is just, we've started to think through recently around whether or not there is potentially scope for a platform that invests in multiple projects. I mean, clearly there's desire from investors to mitigate risk and potentially diversify. So I think that's something that we'd be quite keen to explore with this group and a wider audience is actually in the coming weeks to see if that's, that there's appetite and it might be a sensible way forward given the number of different parties looking to invest in different ways in this. I think finally, just to kind of talk a little bit about what investors I think would like to see from LMIC governments and potentially other donors is, we talked a bit about the off-takers and, who will buy these vaccines. I think, both domestic governments and Gavi/UNICEF have quite a clear role to play here in indicating their likely demand for domestically or regionally produced vaccines. And I think an honest dialogue, upfront about any potential price premium that procurers might be willing to pay to ensure a more resilient domestic supply, I think is really necessary. I think, we talked quite a bit about the holistic need for developing the whole ecosystem. And I think, perhaps donors can also be thinking around how they can bring in their strategic regulatory authorities to provide support to various projects to ensure that this wider ecosystem is there. And finally, I think just on this point of regional coordination, I think it is obviously really critical. Not every single country can develop a business model that is reliant upon exporting to their neighbours if their neighbours are also thinking of doing the same thing. And I think at the moment, because there are so many different conversations taking place, I think this coordination, would be helpful if it started sooner rather than later. And it needs to really be baked into the business cases that are being developed so that they are robust and resilient to kind of the different options that might pan out as various initiatives gain traction on the continent. I think, look, I'll hand back over to you, Jesui and Christophe, because I think there's a lot more to be said from other participants and some of it's been covered, but hopefully that was helpful. Happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Very helpful. Thanks for outlining the investor's perspective. I think you very well outlined the expectations that are there for the governments on the technology providers. And I think I also like your remark about the honest dialogue that we need to have with governments and what kind of support they're ready to provide for increased local production. I think that's a very important point. Let me now introduce our next speaker, Matthew Downham. Matthew is Sustainable Manufacturing Lead with the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovation, CEPI. Matthew, you have the floor.
Thank you very much indeed, Christophe, and thanks everybody for this incredible panel and interesting debate and discussion today. It's wonderful to be here. And on behalf of CEPI, I'd just like to congratulate Africa for the initial distribution of COVID vaccines starting early this week under the COVAX banner. It's a great achievement and it's a phenomenal thing to see. It's really pleasing to see. So in terms of kind of CEPI's position, obviously, the target, the vision, as it were, is to have a world in which epidemics and pandemics are no longer a threat to humanity. What's happened early this week with respect to the COVAX COVID vaccines arriving in Ghana is a clear indication of that. But certainly thinking forward to the future, we're very mindful of some of the excellent topics that have been discussed already today. The disparity in distribution of vaccine manufacturing worldwide. If you go back to about June last year, CEPI issued an expression of interest to really map out and landscape the COVID vaccine manufacturing capacity worldwide. We got a response of about 250 different companies from around the world, focusing in particularly on COVID vaccine, but also their drug substance, drug product, fill finish, and supply capabilities. What we're now planning to do, and what we're beginning to think about very much, is reinstigating that survey, but broadening the net. So not just focusing on COVID vaccines, but saying what exists in countries or regions from research, from the drug substance, drug product, fill finish, right the way through to supply and distribution. In other words, landscape map what exists in particularly Africa, Latin America, and Southeast Asia. It extends the survey that we've already done, and it will build on it substantially, but it will also help us identify where there are key gaps and where we need to focus to try and create a more sustainable network or ecosystem of vaccine manufacturers moving forward. As mentioned by a couple of speakers already, there's a key aspect there in terms of keeping the lights on, as they say, the sustainability aspect. You can't just have a footprint, a manufacturing facility sitting there waiting for the next pandemic. That just won't work. It's how to make that business model work and function appropriately for the countries and or regions that have those manufacturing facilities. The survey will also look not only at the manufacturing facilities that exist today, but where those facilities have aspirations to develop and expand their capability and capacity in future, and even which countries have no vaccine manufacturing or regions that have no vaccine manufacturing and have that aspiration to establish it, to become more autonomous, to become more independent, to have vaccine capability within their borders or within the region. And we've heard already, it's key that you can't have a vaccine manufacturer in every single country. So it's thinking through, for example, in Africa, the Africa CDC regions in the North, South, East, West, and Central Africa. So obviously Nigeria, Egypt, Kenya, Gabon, and Zambia could be kind of the regional centers, regional points. It's also to think through that kind of hub and spoke business model, but I think David Robinson's going to talk more about that a little bit later. So in terms of what's kind of required is this global stakeholder ecosystem that's focused on improving manufacturing capability and capacity, particularly to improve that in low middle income countries to facilitate a sustainable, agile business model moving forward. It's going to require things like government and public-private partnerships. And we've heard already about investment opportunities, investment banks, venture capitalists, and CEPI are beginning to hear and be approached by those wishing to invest, particularly in LMICs, to move forward with increasing the manufacturing capacity and capability. So we're looking to fulfill this survey to get this global picture, to develop what we have already, and really identify how to improve the footprint and capacities in certain countries or regions. We recognize also that it's like a jigsaw, really. Not only will we identify the pieces of the jigsaw that exist, but also the pieces of the jigsaw that are missing and what needs to be fulfilled. There might be such things as regulatory requirements. The African Medicines Agency, for example, is a key initiative that has good interest to fulfill that, particularly for the continent of Africa. So there's a regulatory requirement, there's strategic aspects and governance, particularly not just governments and regional offices, but ownership of these manufacturing initiatives, these footprints as such. And key to that is in-country or region training to build that skill base, to build that experience and capability to independently run those facilities and have true and absolute ownership of them. There's other aspects like logistics, infrastructure, startup investment, and long-term financial planning all segues into that business model concept. So we're beginning to think very much about all of this, as I say, triggered off the expression of interest that we ran through last year. And it's key that we start engaging with global stakeholders and ecosystems, which we will be leaning on to get the information to broaden the survey that was rolled out last year. So I hope this kind of expresses some kind of vision, as it were, of where CEPI are beginning to position things moving forward. We're thinking particularly about CEPI's future from 2022 to 2026, and that leads into some of the vision and mission comments that I've kind of made here. And it's all about preparing, transforming, and being able to connect and enhance that global infrastructure, that global network to facilitate moving forwards to improve vaccine manufacturing capacity and capability in a range of countries where currently maybe they don't exist, or they exist but need further expansion and building of capability. And it's building those relationships between countries that are willing to step up and support this activity, and we're beginning to look into this as well. We're beginning to engage with certain countries that say, yes, we would like to support and provide technical transfer capacity, training opportunities, leverage technologies that we have to enhance capability in various LMICs. We're talking also with countries about offering training opportunities and financiers, as I mentioned, to support those investments moving forward. So all of these kinds of points are key, and I hope it kind of touches on some of the questions that we've been raising here and talking about in terms of the finance, the infrastructure, building the facilities. Key is that ecosystem, that network, that global group of people, that organizational aspect to really drive this forward through the key business models. I'm going to stop there, and I'm happy to take any questions, and I look forward to any further discussion through the course of this important meeting. Thank you very much, Christoph.
Thank you, Matthew, and great work for the landscape mapping. I noticed both you and Patrick highlighted the importance to build up an enabling ecosystem for vaccine manufacturing. Thank you for this input.
You're welcome.
With that, yeah, thank you. So now I would like to introduce the next speaker, Subir Kumar Basak. Subir is a senior specialist, life sciences, International Finance Corporation. Subir, I believe you have a slide, right?
Yes.
So you may now share your slide. Thank you.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Jesui, and thanks to Christoph and Jesui for inviting us to participate in this very distinguished panel. Thanks to WHO and UNCTAD. I just wanted to also mention that right when COVID started, there was a lot of momentum and leadership from various participants of this panel discussion, and more importantly, WHO taking a leadership along with several organizations to kind of do a mapping of who are the vaccine manufacturers in the planet, who have the drug substance, drug product, and fill finish capabilities, who have the technologies, etc. So I was very fortunate to be part of that group, to be able to volunteer and put that information together in a rather very quick pace. I'll also like to begin by saying that IFC has a very rich history of working in the healthcare sector. We actually came out right away at the pandemic with a global health platform, which I've mentioned here. Essentially being able to invest and deploy quickly about $500 million in various health-related investments. And we have a pipeline of about $1.5 billion already. What we have been working over the many years is consistently building self-sufficiency with incorporation of technologies to be able to make generics, vaccines, and various high-quality pharmaceutical products in the LMIC countries, and working closely with our World Bank colleagues who are developing policies to help the local governments there to come with policies which help the private sector. We have been able to deploy cash and be able to support those kind of growth plans for such manufacturing facilities. So if you look at the chart here at the priority sectors, I would like to begin that the vaccine, the whole initiative, it's very important to look at the building blocks of vaccines, not just the local manufacturing of the vaccine product itself. So we look at the excipients, the raw materials, the various components that are used for manufacture of the vaccine, including the assemblies, the filter assemblies, purification, cell culture, various technologies, the hardware and the software. We look at the various medical equipment manufacturing. So we look at essentially the tubing, the various mechanisms to be able to give the syringes, the pre-filled syringes, vials, etc. That is also a very important component of getting the vaccine. And then, of course, a very important aspect is the vaccine manufacturing itself, the fill finish, the drug product, the drug substance, and the incorporation and connection and the integration of technology with the talent pool that exists in the private sector to be able to convert these technologies into life-saving vaccines. So essentially, that's how we operate. And IFC also has a very a long history of having technical experts in-house who are helping the clients at various stages of formulation. For example, besides just looking at the enabling factors, meaning the government commitment and the policy and the finance, what's also important are, I would say, 6 different parameters or key success factors, which are very important, some of which have already been mentioned. We look at the company being able to have a very strong quality department and quality personnel to be able to comply with, suppose, the WHO pre-qualification and the local government qualification and the regulatory approval, which is quite complex and it's ever changing. So at the minimum, we expect that our private sector clients and partners will be able to enable themselves and have all the mechanisms to be able to comply. Second, we look at is very sophisticated and very nice manner in which the company is being able to develop the analytics to the demand supply for short, medium, long term. And that's very important considering that in the geographies that we operate, it's sometimes very difficult to get access to that kind of a data for long range data. So vaccine is a very long-term ball game, as one of the speakers mentioned. It's not something that you can do as a knee-jerk reaction and get enabled immediately. It takes a long time. It takes a lot of commitment, and having a good analytical platform, the market intelligence is very important. The third aspect I want to mention is that rather than having a one product pony, it's very important to have a basket kind of approach. And may not be you develop a lot of vaccines all at once, but there has to be a plan to be able to make a vaccine 1, 2, 3 over the years of 3, 5, 7 years. So there has to be some kind of a strategic roadmap that's very important. And along with that, as one of the speakers mentioned, it's also not necessary that if you can make one product, you can make another. So that's where selection of technology partners, platforms is very important, and how you cooperate and with some of these institutes, which may be local, some of them may be outside the country, but having and forging those alliances is very important. The next, the fifth and sixth thing I'd like to mention is it's very important in this kind of a area to be sustainable, in the sense that you have to have a 10, 20-year horizon that you're looking at. So we have already started looking at not only just the COVID aspect, but as we have always done, looking at making all kinds of different vaccines. Some of them which are already existing infectious diseases, and some which are expected in the decades to come. And as we have already seen in the last 2 decades, several proliferation of infectious diseases. And the companies who had the capacity, who had the enabling components available, they were actually ready to be able to engage and quickly deploy resources to develop the products. The last thing I want to mention is the real importance of technical talent. Technical talent is scarce. It's scarce not only in the developed markets, it's more scarce in emerging LMIC countries. So if you have you're developing an ecosystem of this talent pool, it's very important to nurture, nourish this talent pool, enable them to be able to stay connected with this whole global technology ecosystem, and to really be able to have strict, very strong attraction and retention mechanisms. So with that, I'd like to mention that we have been working with our clients in all these parameters, both existing as well as prospective. And we do a lot of support and help in terms of even helping companies who do not have the mechanisms of all these enabling components today, but want to be able to get there. And then how do we get there from where they are now to in the next year or two? Those are the special advisory services and offerings that we also provide as a bank. So thank you very much. I really appreciate being able to participate and share our thoughts.
Thank you very much, Samir, for your comprehensive presentation of how you help the companies. May I ask you to stop sharing your screen? Yes, thank you very much. And I am now very pleased to introduce the next speaker, David Robinson with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. David, you have the floor.
Great, thank you very much. So I'm really pleased to be on this panel. It's been excellent topics so far. And not to reiterate, but just to emphasize, agree very much with the comments from Mary Angela and John. This really is not about capacity. As a matter of fact, one could project that as we come out of COVID, and again, knock on wood, that we will be coming out of COVID, that there could be an excess of capacity. It's really about equity. And equity comes down to the fact that there's a very high concentration of where the existing vaccine capacity, manufacturing capacity is, primarily US, India, Indonesia, China, some parts, to some degree, Europe. And now if you look to see who's getting vaccinated first, you see it correlates very much with where vaccine production capacity is starting, as pointed out by John. Something like 600,000 doses delivered last week on the continent of Africa under COVAX, which was great. But at the same time, in my home country, the United States, 60 million doses of vaccine were available. So we really have to further diversify vaccine supply in order to address the issues of vaccine equity, particularly in the face of pandemics. However, I also very much agree with Subhash, Amudo, Patrick, and others who point out that this can't be all local manufacturing. Of taking the extreme, of course, of 192 countries all having their own vaccine manufacturing, we know this will be doomed to failure because we've seen this before. As the saying goes, you've seen the movie before, we know how it turns out, with many of those efforts failing. So it needs to be a regional model with very good global coordination. So the three factors to point out here, and some of these were pointed out by Suresh, Patrick, and Victoria as well, is we need to have global coordination when you think about investing in that entire vaccine ecosystem. And very importantly, as has been pointed out by others, is we need a business model that ensures financial sustainability. Someone from the World Bank a year ago phrased to me that we live in cycles of panic and neglect, and the panic phase, everyone's going to be very interested in investing. In the neglect phase, in between the pandemics, governments and other donors aren't going to be willing to continue to invest in facilities that are bleeding money. We need to have a sustainable business model, else we'll be back in the cycle, someone from Harvard phrased it, of build and decay, where you build a facility, it goes unused and decays. And importantly, as pointed out by, I think, Victoria and Beth both, if we're going to build, we should leapfrog technologies and build with new manufacturing technologies. Countries today, if they want to invest in phone systems, not building landlines. It's all cellular. We need to do the same thing here with manufacturing technologies and invest in new technologies and use new technologies. Those new technologies can decrease the cost of vaccine manufacturing from a capital perspective by a factor of 10, and from a operating cost perspective by factors of 2 or 3. And with that, with a new technology, small regional facilities can be cost competitive with the large centralized facilities, as there's no need for Gavi, UNICEF, or other purchasers to pay a premium for a vaccine that's manufactured of a small facility. These can be cost competitive. Answering questions around who should invest, what the role of the foundation will be when it comes to investing in large facilities. This is not the role of a private foundation. This really is the role of countries. Both donor countries and recipient countries need to invest, because there's a strong vested interest from everyone to keep their citizens safe. And as pointed out about Mariangelo at the very beginning, no one's safe until everyone's safe. It's a strong interest there. So donor countries are going to have to invest in these facilities. Where the foundation will continue to invest is in developing the technologies and de-risking the technologies. We have grants ongoing for new technologies to reduce costs for manufacturing the 3 major classes of vaccines that we can consider, those being the protein-based particle subunit vaccines, the viral vector vaccines, and mRNA vaccines, as well as in fill finish and fill containers. We'll continue to provide seed and catalytic funding to help with efforts, and we'll also continue to support efforts at strengthening vaccine ecosystems as well as training. And we'll also work on, and we're also willing to work with people on a business plan, because that will be critical for all this, is to really work on the business plan for this. And that, importantly, is going to need a continental view, right? Because the people on the continent know the markets best. And I apologize for my dog in the background, but people on the continent know their markets best. We're going to need the continental viewpoint on this. And finally, as pointed out by Matthew, what he proposed is what we'll call a hub and spoke model, where, and really importantly, we have to reduce the cost of tech transfer and the time taken for tech transfer. Right, so we have to reduce. That's what we propose is building a series of regional facilities that are all identical, using new technologies, all identical. So if you transfer into one facility, you can tech transfer to any other facility very readily. And these facilities could be located on the continent of Africa. They could be located in underserved regions in South America or parts of Asia, as well as in various other high-income countries that don't have existing vaccine manufacturing. And so our proposal, again, is we'll continue to de-risk the technologies. We'll continue to work with the international communities and the local communities in terms of what a hub and spoke model would look like and what a globally coordinated set of regional facilities would look like. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. I really like your intervention. And repeat again, not all the countries are suitable for local production of a vaccine. We must start this business case, sustainable business case. Because we don't have a lot of time left, I would like to go to the next session. Having listened to the views of the policymakers, manufacturers, and investors, let's turn to the providers of technology and know-how. It will be very important to learn what they can do to de-risk investment in vaccine manufacturing. To begin, we have a great pleasure to introduce Manu Das, Director Middle East and Africa from Merck, Germany. Manu, you have the floor, please.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot for the invitation to UNCTAD WHO. Thanks for the interesting interventions of the panelists. And yeah, I'm happy to. I will hopefully not use my full 6 minutes because we're running out of time. Yeah, my name is Manuel Batz. I'm based in Darmstadt and I work for Merck KGaA, not MSD. This is just a thing that we are that we need to make clear that still is, yeah, obviously because we have the same name, misleading. Merck Life Science is a leading supplier of technologies for the biomanufacturing. We are fully loaded with orders for the current fight against the pandemic. We're supplying all COVID and vaccine manufacturers, and so we own the technology, if you will. What we do in Africa. Since 2016, when I took my current role, we've been driving the so-called Merck Africa Vaccine Initiative, trying to enable local fill and finish of vaccines in a sustainable manner. This is the theme of every intervention I've heard. We need sustainability, yeah, and this is what we've been trying to do. And we went well beyond our role of a supplier of technology. We tried to convene and to do something different. So I go quickly along the questions. How do you contribute to de-risking investments in vaccine production? So first of all, it's our experience in the assessment of viability of projects that come to us. Yeah, we can assess quite early on the risks. Are the timelines realistic? Is the funding there? Are volumes understood? The products understood? What are the expectations in terms of cost? Yeah, if they want to local manufacture and then pay half the cost of the UNICEF price, then we know we're not talking to the right people. Are they expecting full manufacturing in 6 months? Yeah, like a Penta. And then also we know there is a lot of risk in these type of projects. And to further de-risk, we come with technology. This is the what David mentioned. So we have developed with partners a pre-engineered modular fill and finish plant template together with Apiject and Romelac. Apiject is an innovative inventor of a single-use blow-fill-seal injection device that we think is the right technology for high-volume, low-cost manufacturing in Africa for fill and finish. That will allow contract manufacturing facilities on the continent that should work at the same standard as in Europe at Catalent or at Lonza. So in the current context of the COVID vaccines, instead of sending bulk drug substance to Lonza in Switzerland, why not have a facility in Accra that can do it and supply faster the local needs? Then quickly, do you transfer know-how and do you ensure sustainability? Of course, we transfer technology and innovation, and the sustainability. Yeah, we try to make it happen by involving many stakeholders, like many of the ones that are in the panel, because we as a technology providers, we are just serving one part of the equation. All the other stakeholders need to be sitting at the table early on. And what do we expect from beneficiary firms, host country governments, and investors? So yeah, ideally we start with a coalition, a broad technical coalition and other coalition partners, and work together with the governments and the local organizations. The drive and the need needs to be bottom up, needs to come from country. We cannot tell them or tell countries what to do. There needs to be the drive. This is the initial energy that needs to be there. And then I'm coming to my conclusion. The scope of the project and expected outcomes should be clear early on. And here I speak of the backbone of a project. And this is, from my perspective and our perspective and experience, there are three pillars. We need to understand the vaccine and products we are talking about. Is it routine, COVID, pandemic, CEPI, stockpile, other injectables? What portfolio are we talking of, and what benefits do we expect? Then we need the vaccine market. Is it national? Is it sub-regional? Is it regional? Is it donor funded? Is it local governments, yeah, that fund it? And the third pillar, manufacturing. Yeah, there needs to be, we think a contract manufacturing is the best approach to be flexible in terms of portfolio over time as well. Don't close opportunities for sustainable businesses by just closing the different options. So the contract manufacturing model is, we think, the best option for fill finish. You need to have an early idea of costing. And of course, the local partner, the local pharma company that acts as the investor, needs to have a pharmaceutical know-how. We don't recommend and will not do any project where there is somebody from the, I don't know, construction industry or food industry wanting to fill finish vaccines. We would not do this. So this is already yeah, the end. So it's not easy, else it would already exist. We need innovation. We need out of the box thinking. And we are happy for everyone who comes with solutions to the challenges we all know about, and then work together to make it happen, what everyone is seeking. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Manuel. Thanks a lot for highlighting your innovative fill and finish technology, and also the fact that you see yourselves as one element in the bigger puzzle. I think that's really important to keep in mind. One remark to the audience, please note that we will run a little, well, you note that we're going to be a little bit late. I hope as many of you as possible can remain with us for a few more minutes. It's really worthwhile, because our next speaker is Kate Antrobus, who is Chief Investment Officer at Universals. Kate, I believe you will speak about hub and spoke, which has already been mentioned by various speakers before. You have the floor, please.
Thank you so much, Christoph, and thanks to a fascinating panel. It's a tough 2 hours to follow, but I'm delighted that so many of the speakers have hit points that, you know, or hit on things that we at Universals are trying to do. I think I saw one of the questions in the chat was, you know, to play devil's advocate, why are we even talking about vaccine manufacturing? And I think the way that we at Universals think about that is that COVID is a tragedy, but it's also an opportunity to create or set in place systems and structures that help support long-term sustainability of access. And the way that we believe that will happen is through distributed production and decentralized production. And I think the reason why we're all around this panel and anyone else attending is because they also kind of believe in that model, in a paradigm shift in the way that vaccines are made, from, I think, what David called concentrated production to a more distributed production. And why do you do that? It's about, because access is not just about pricing, it's also buying a product in foreign currency is very different for a nation or the private sector from producing it locally, and all of the benefits that were outlined, I think, by colleagues at the IFC, by the African Development Bank, around local production. So what I really wanted to talk a little bit about is about how Universal's group is trying to make that vision of distributed manufacturing a reality. And we really, we do that. We're a group of life sciences companies with a vision of making biologics available to all, but we kind of operate across 4 quite disparate companies under a common banner of hub and spoke, and that was mentioned by David. The way, when we think about barriers to distributed production, I think the first one we focus on a lot is technology-driven affordability. So the technology with which we produce vaccines has evolved considerably, and we are very focused on providing manufacturing solutions that are low cost, low footprint, precisely the leapfrogging that some of the different stakeholders have spoken about. And what that does is it reduces one of the biggest barriers to creating new vaccine manufacturing, which is the cost of setup. And I think traditionally a vaccine facility is, $100, $200 million. We hope to reduce that by a factor of 5 to 10. So that's kind of, barrier 1. I think the second barrier is know-how. And in that, Universal's really focuses not just on manufacturing solutions, but on technology transfer and on supporting the entire infrastructure broadly, not just physical infrastructure, but human infrastructure and enabling infrastructure to produce vaccines locally. So that's technology transfer, that's transfer of know-how. That's really thinking about our equipment is designed for transfer, it's designed to be easy for use, but we also complement that with operational support services for vaccine manufacturers or biologics manufacturers that we help bring online with training programs. So that's kind of barrier number 2. I think the third piece, and our colleagues at Serum spoke a lot about this, about how vaccines are complicated and difficult, and there is no such thing as a generic vaccine. It's not like simple compounds. And so, and vaccine manufacturing is not easy. And so the way that we really approach that is to have a central hub, our hub in Belgium, where we have our own GMP production facility, we do contract manufacturing, we do process development, but the idea is to provide a kind of central campus to support and maintain a distributed network of bioproduction facilities. And that's really leveraging our expertise, but also making sure that any new site, remains supported and in contact with what's kind of going on in international best practices, whether they opt to be GMP or not. The fourth aspect is flexibility. I think somebody asked, what happens? H1N1 was a massive lesson in building capacity that didn't get used, which is kind of the worst outcome of an initiative like this. And so we think a lot about how we design our suite of technologies to be modular, flexible. Those words get used a lot, but I'm not a scientist. I think of it like an IKEA kitchen of vaccine manufacturing, and our technical team would probably kill us if they heard me say that. But it's really around having technology that can be interchanged so that you can meet, with some adaptation, routine needs, rapidly respond to future pandemics, and even think about other products that aren't necessarily limited to vaccines. And that the point that I think Institut Pasteur were making around not just manufacturing capacity, but development capacity. So in the context of COVID, we're thinking about local variants and maybe producing locally appropriate variants. But going forward, it's about producing vaccines explicitly targeted to a particular region or nation. And then the fifth piece is partnerships. And manufacturing, and we focus on manufacturing of drug substance, but as has been pointed out, there's drug product, which requires fill finish, and then there's the whole host of subsequent activities around commercialization, supply chain, distribution, regulatory, the whole ecosystem. So I'm really glad that this kind of consortium is coming together, and I've just realized I completely forgot to share my slides, so I'm going to do that now. You can see, hopefully it echoes what I said. But this really illustrates, I think, how Universals is trying to go about being part of the solution, and is building a series of companies that can help address different parts of of the challenge that we're describing here, and ultimately the goal is we're not a not-for-profit, and we don't expect, not all, some of our partners might be not-for-profit, but we don't expect that new manufacturers coming online are going to be not-for-profits either. So the aim is to allow us to do this at terms which support continued financial sustainability and support continued access. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Now I'm pleased to introduce two speakers to complete the interventions for this webinar. We have Martina Micheletti from the Department of Biochemical Engineering at the University College London, and Penny Carmichael, Policy Advisor from the Vaccine Manufacturing Research Hub, or we said VAX Hub. Both Martina and Penny will speak about the VAX Hub, which facilitates manufacturing processes in vaccine production. Thank you. The floor is yours, please.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to represent academia at this roundtable. And I can tell you a little bit about our successful story of the vaccine manufacturing hub called VAX Hub. So together with Professor Sarah Gilbert from the University of Oxford, I am the co-director of quite a successful collaboration between academia, government organizations, different networks, and industrial partners, which essentially proposes an innovative program of research aiming at developing, scaling, and manufacturing vaccines for the specific benefit of LMIC. And within our program, we propose technologies that speed up process development, other technologies that are aimed at lowering cost. We adopt platform manufacturing approaches, but also novel engineering tools which could potentially be applicable to vaccines against the different pathogens. And we believe this flexibility is really important given the uncertain nature of the vaccine market, as was highlighted before. How we are proposing to, within this collaboration, to essentially de-risk the investments is in two ways. We have a large research program. This is led by subject matter experts and on-site researchers, which are based at different academic institutions and companies that have visibility of essentially innovative research outcomes, but also they're able to steer the research agenda. We also have platform manufacturing. So essentially we selected and awarded different projects tailored to companies' needs, so to resolve a company's challenges. So companies could trial new technologies, could advance knowledge and tech transfer with very little risk to themselves. And the hub was also had a role of enhancing networking between, for example, some of the our LMIC partners and big pharma, or some new some SMEs, facilitating network and new partnerships, but also fostering long-term collaborations. And lastly, we supported them with a specific training programs. This was aimed at the LMIC manufacturers employee, and I'd like here to highlight something that has been mentioned before a bit in terms of the importance of training the workforce, and academia can definitely have a role in that, because it's a provision, it's basically one of the biggest providers of CPD courses. I'll just give one example in the interest of time of the things we have done. One of the questions we're trying to answer, for example, is can we have some novel technologies aimed at providing cheaper and simpler process alternative to traditional glycoconjugate methods, for example, for making vaccines against pneumococcus. Now the hub, our collaboration started in 2018, and we have obviously contributed to the success of the vaccine developments during the pandemic in the UK. We now have a number of ongoing projects, for example, on viral vector manufacturing, looking at better formulations, but also proposing new technologies mimicking critical large-scale environments. And this is really important to gain very early manufacturing insights. So this is a successful story coming to an end, but we're looking into ways of expanding our objectives and really set up a long-term UK hub in vaccine manufacturing, which can be a global resource. And now I'm just over to Penny now.
Thanks, Martina. I just wanted to add really briefly to what Martina shared and kind of end by reflecting on the importance of global collaboration and partnerships. This has been a hugely important theme today, as has the role of shared efforts through technology development. through technology transfer hubs and research hubs such as the Vax Hub. As Martina said, they're kind of key elements of de-risking vaccine manufacturing. The hub's funded research and partnership models provide manufacturers with access to resource-efficient process innovation and capability building through tailored training, as well as research and development efforts. They also create huge value for the range of stakeholders involved through networks of knowledge exchange. As we move to the next phase of our Vax Hub, as Martina shared, we're going to continue to seek out opportunities to extend our reach and work with partners to secure the supply of essential vaccines. We hope to continue this hugely important conversation over the coming months. So many thanks to the WHO and to UNCTAD for this opportunity today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Penny and Martina, for outlining your work. I think you're doing really important work in the entire context of this vaccine challenge. I could really see the building of a coalition of stakeholders, including technology facilitators that really make novel technologies possible in developing countries, that de-risk investment, then investors coming in, governments playing their supportive role, and of course the manufacturers working together. I think if we combine these forces and we promote this kind of discussion, we can actually achieve something. So I think this is really the very important lesson today, that we learn that this kind of collaboration is really essential for the way forward, not only on COVID, but especially beyond. I apologize for the delay that we have. I don't think we have more time to go into any questions in the Q&A, so my apologies for this, but I think we had a really, really interesting exchange here with all of you. And from UNCTAD's side, I can only say that we're very interested in staying connected with you and in following up to this meeting. This, in my hope, is not a one-off event, but this is really the beginning of a longer discussion and dialogue among all of us. Thank you very much on behalf of UNCTAD, and I pass over to Jessie. Thank you.
Thank you, Christoph. First, let me thank you, Christoph, for this excellent collaboration. We really appreciate. And I also would like to thank all the speakers for your excellent interventions. Thank the participants to take your time to join us. We had a very good discussion. WHO also will continue to foster partnership and work with you all in promoting sustainable quality local production, especially now in vaccine production. Thank you all, and let's continue to have a good work collectively. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessie. All the best to everyone. Thanks to you.
Thank you.